Our first case involves Chad Isaac. The security footage was eerily deliberate, showing a man in an orange hoodie walking the exact same path at the exact same time, precisely 1 week apart. That first visit on March 25th went completely unnoticed. But on April 1st, 2019, that rehearsal became North Dakota's most brutal workplace massacre in recent memory. Chad Isaac was not the kind of man anyone would suspect of such horror. At 44 years old, the Washburn chiropractor had built a respectable practice in a small prairie town of 1,300 residents. He was a Navy veteran and a graduate of Palmer College in Iowa. He opened Isaac Chiropractic in 2015 after years of treating patients in nearby Hazen. His office sat prominently on Main Avenue, marked by a strange skeleton sign that locals found odd but harmless. Professionally, his record was completely spotless. There were no disciplinary actions, no criminal history, and nothing to suggest the violence boiling under his quiet exterior. His regular patients included local sheriff's deputies and residents who trusted him completely with their physical health. Isaac lived modestly in a local trailer park, a property managed by a company called RJR Maintenance and Management. That connection to RJR would become incredibly significant, though the motive remains one of this case's most haunting mysteries. On the morning of April 1st, Isaac rescheduled a noon appointment, claiming he had an urgent dental visit he needed to attend. That excuse seemed reasonable enough, until detectives found zero evidence he ever went to a dentist that day. Instead, security cameras captured him parking his white Ford F-150 pickup at a McDonald's lot near Memorial Highway in Mandan, roughly 40 miles from his home. Dressed in dark clothes and a reversible ski mask, he walked purposefully toward the RJR maintenance office. The building was quiet in those early hours, before the Monday rush. Inside, 4 unsuspecting people were just beginning their workdays. Robert Fackler, the 52-year-old co-owner who built RJR into a thriving property management firm; Adam Fuhrer, a dedicated 42-year-old employee; and Bill Cobb, 50, alongside his 45-year-old wife Lois. They were a married couple who had recently relocated from Illinois to build a new life in North Dakota together. They had just purchased their dream home, but what unfolded inside that office over the next 15 minutes defies comprehension. The attack was methodical, savage, and swift. Investigators later testified that the 4 victims suffered over 100 stab wounds collectively. 3 of them were also shot. The brutality was so extreme that trauma counselors were brought to the trial to support the jurors reviewing the evidence. Isaac moved through the building with chilling precision, leaving absolute horror in his wake. Afterward, he stole one of RJR's company trucks. He drove Bill Cobb's truck to a nearby business called Indigo Signs, abandoned it, and walked back to his pickup at McDonald's. Fresh blood smears stained the door handle. Security footage showed him altering his clothes before driving north out of Mandan. He crossed the Missouri River toward Washburn. Around 7:30 that morning, first responders rushed to RJR after a call reporting a medical emergency. What they actually found was far worse. Still, the investigation moved rapidly despite the shocking nature of the crime. Law enforcement quickly circulated photos of the suspect's vehicle, asking nearby agencies to watch closely. In Washburn, Detective Justin Cromemer, one of Isaac's own chiropractic patients, instantly recognized that white F-150. On the morning of April 4th, 3 days after the horror at RJR, Cromemer quietly snapped photos of Isaac's truck in the mobile home park. The match was absolutely unmistakable. Within minutes, dozens of police officers descended on Washburn, detaining Isaac during a traffic stop close to his home. When Cromemer had tried to covertly photograph the truck earlier, he had spotted Isaac staring straight at him through the window. The pile of evidence that prosecutors ultimately gathered was staggering. DNA swabs taken from inside Isaac's truck revealed genetic material from Robert Fackler and possibly Lois Cobb. Forensic experts matched fiber evidence from all 4 victims to Isaac's orange hoodie and his reversible ski mask. Inside his home, investigators found spent ammunition casings, a knife, and gun components, some hidden in his freezer amid what prosecutors called macabre trophies. Shell casings and bullet fragments from the crime scene perfectly matched ammunition found stored inside his house. Bloody shoe prints at the scene matched the exact class of footwear recovered from Isaac's dryer. But perhaps most damning to examine is the patchwork of surveillance footage along Memorial Highway, meticulously reconstructed by the prosecution. The timeline tracked Isaac's path from McDonald's to RJR, and his escape in the stolen vehicle, his return to his truck, and his drive back to Washburn, all caught on multiple cameras in chilling detail. Bail was set at $1 million cash. Isaac pleaded not guilty, but legal motions repeatedly delayed his trial. Court began in August 2021. For nearly 3 weeks, prosecutors presented their meticulous case to a jury of 6 men and 6 women. Defense attorney Bruce Quick acknowledged the heinous crimes, but argued investigators rushed to judgment, ignoring other potential suspects, including disgruntled tenants and fired employees, and even the ex-husband of a woman allegedly having an affair with Robert Fackler. But the evidence proved overwhelming. After 4.5 hours of deliberation spanning 2 days, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all counts: 4 murders, burglary, unlawful vehicle entry, and unauthorized use of a vehicle. At sentencing, in December 2021, painful victim impact statements filled the courtroom with grief. Robert Fackler's stepdaughter told Isaac she wanted him to experience lifetimes of suffering. Through heavy tears, Adam Fuhrer's stepmother struggled to address the convicted man directly. "You took my kid away from me, and you had no right." Judge David Reich sentenced Isaac to 4 consecutive life terms without parole, 1 for each life stolen. Throughout the trial, Isaac maintained his innocence. At sentencing, his only words were chillingly simple. "I can honestly tell you, I am not a murderer, and that's all I have to say." He began serving his term at North Dakota State Penitentiary, appealing his conviction. But on July 31st, 2022, guards discovered Isaac had taken his own life. He was 48. The motive that might explain why a trusted chiropractor transformed into a calculated destroyer of 4 innocent lives died with him, leaving families, investigators, and an entire community searching for answers that will never come. The quiet town of Washburn tried moving forward. His chiropractic office was remodeled into court space, though his mobile home sat unsold for years. But while one community grappled with harboring such unfathomable violence, another former public servant in South Dakota was about to shock local residents with actions that proved a deep betrayal could wear the badge of authority itself. Case 2. Jay Astrom. A badge and a ballot once defined his identity. 21 years protecting citizens in Wyoming, then leading a small South Dakota town as mayor. But on Memorial Day 2024, the man sworn to uphold justice became its worst betrayer, transforming a quiet residential street into a crime scene that would shock even the most seasoned detectives. J. Edward Ostrom built his career on public trust. Starting in the 1980s, he climbed the ranks of the Gillette, Wyoming Police Department, eventually reaching sergeant before retiring in 2003 after 2 decades of service. That experience bought him credibility when he moved to Turner County, South Dakota, joining the sheriff's office as a deputy. His reputation preceded him, and residents of Centerville, a community of fewer than 1,000 people roughly 40 miles south of Sioux Falls, knew him as someone who understood law enforcement inside and out. In 2009, he successfully ran for mayor, holding office until his resignation in 2011. Though controversies did occasionally surface, such as a federal lawsuit from a former police chief alleging inappropriate conduct, which was eventually settled through mediation, Astrom remained a prominent figure in local circles. By 2024, at 64, he lived quietly on Main Street with his wife, Lee. But that facade of normalcy shattered on the evening of May 27th. 4 days earlier on Thursday, May 23rd, something deeply disturbing happened inside the Ostrom home. According to later testimony, Lee had been drinking with a neighbor, a man living right across the street, while Jay slept in another room. The encounter escalated when the neighbor allegedly exposed himself and forced unwanted physical contact on her. Traumatized but silent, Lee carried that heavy burden for days before finally telling her husband on Memorial Day evening. What happened next unfolded with terrifying speed. Upon hearing his wife's account, Astrom, described by Lisa as having stormed out in a rage, grabbed weapons from his collection. As a former law enforcement officer, he possessed deep firearms expertise and an arsenal that included an AR-style rifle. He carried a .380 handgun and a shotgun. His wife stayed inside, unsure where he was going but knowing he left armed and furious. She wouldn't see him again before the police arrived. Just across Main Street, at the home of the suspected shooter, 26-year-old Paul Francis was spending the evening with his 21-year-old brother, Zach, and 35-year-old Timothy Richmond. Shortly before 9:45 that night, Zach placed a desperate call to 911. His voice was panicked and terrified. His brother had been shot and killed with a shotgun by a neighbor across the street who had already walked back home. The dispatcher stayed on the line, trying to keep Zach calm, when suddenly his panic turned to sheer agony. The killer had returned. Zach gasped out that he had been shot too. Moments later, the line went dead. Police rushed to Centerville, but in this rural area, backup took precious minutes. A conservation officer with South Dakota Game, Fish, and Parks was the first to arrive, waiting for support before heading into what was clearly a highly volatile, active scene. As he waited outside, the officer noticed movement. A man was walking out of a nearby garage. It was Jay Astrom, walking west down the south side of Main Street. The officer ordered him to freeze, but Astrom kept walking. Only when the patrol car pulled closer with repeated, shouting demands did Astrom finally stop, dropping to the pavement and calmly telling the officer he had a gun in his pocket. When a Beresford police officer arrived from 12 miles away to help, they discovered the true extent of the horror. Blood was smeared on Astrom's left hand, and the heavy smell of alcohol hung around him. Near him lay an AR-style rifle. In his pocket, a .380 handgun. Spent shotgun and rifle casings littered the ground. Officers stepped inside the home Zach had called from, finding all three young men dead from gunshot wounds. Paul Francis, Zach Francis, and Timothy Richmond, victims of a methodical execution by a shooter trained to kill with deadly precision. Back at the Astrom home, detectives questioned his wife Lee, who described the assault allegations and her husband's sudden, explosive rage when he found out. She confirmed his background in law enforcement and admitted he owned several guns, including the black rifle officers had recovered at the scene. Astrom was booked into the Minnehaha County Jail just before 8 a.m. on May 28th, under 12 hours after the shooting. Cash-only bond was set at $1 million. Attorney General Marty Jackley announced 3 counts of first-degree murder. By June, a Turner County grand jury indicted Astrom on 9 felony charges. 3 counts of first-degree murder, 3 of second-degree murder, and 3 counts of first-degree murder while committing a burglary. Each first-degree charge carried a potential penalty of life in prison or even death. Astrom entered a plea of not guilty. His defense team, led by court-appointed lawyers Seth Clint and Raleigh Hansman, requested a mental evaluation, which was completed and sealed by the court. Logistical problems arose when the courthouse in Parker suffered structural damage and was closed, forcing the trial to relocate to McCook County Courthouse in Salem. Judge Chris Giles took over the trial after Judge David Knopf's initial involvement. In August 2024, prosecutors announced they would not seek the death penalty if Astrom was convicted of first-degree murder, though he still faced life in prison without the possibility of parole. Astrom waived his right to a speedy trial, and as the legal battle dragged into late 2025, the case moved closer to a jury. Grieving relatives attended every court date, holding up signs to honor Paul, Zach, and Timothy, 3 lives taken by a man who once swore to protect his community, not destroy it. For now, the case lingered, awaiting trial, where prosecutors would argue premeditation, while defense lawyers managed a client whose police background had collided so tragically with explosive, personal rage. Meanwhile, Centerville grapples with the dark reality that trusting those sworn to protect us can sometimes become a deadly, tragic mistake. But while one former lawman awaited judgment for letting vengeance override justice, another young man in North Dakota was about to show how entitlement and desperation could twist a mental health crisis into an officer's final, fatal encounter. Case 3. Ian Kramer. Sometimes entitlement and desperation crash together on a winter road, turning a mother's frantic effort to help her son into a disaster that claimed a deputy's life just days before his planned retirement. When severe mental illness collides with methamphetamine, panic quickly replaces reason. The fallout can be devastating, even for the powerful. Ian Kramer was born carrying a deeply complicated legacy. He was the adopted son of Kevin Kramer, a Republican congressman who would later serve as a U.S. Senator. Under constant spotlight, Ian carried the crushing expectations of his family's high status. But behind closed doors, his life was a descent into chaos, marked by worsening psychiatric issues, severe drug dependencies, and a long history of violent outbursts. Back in 2013, he pleaded guilty to assaulting his own brother, a brutal attack that left physical scars and exposed a dangerous volatility simmering inside him. His record slowly grew, filled with drunk driving charges and numerous traffic violations, and a suspected assault down in Houston. By December 2023, 42-year-old Ian was trapped in severe paranoia and hallucinations, later described by his father as symptoms of deep psychiatric illness. Yet what the family kept private was that his terrifying mental decline was not just an organic breakdown, but directly from years of abusing methamphetamine and bath salts, toxic substances that specialists would state triggered his violent, psychotic episode. By the afternoon of December 6th, his mental state had collapsed, making some kind of intervention absolutely vital. His mother, Chris, saw the warning signs and had to make the desperate choice so many families face in a crisis. She drove her son to a hospital in Bismarck, seeking urgent evaluation and treatment. They made a quick stop at his place to grab personal items, including a heavy backpack that police later found stuffed with meth, cocaine, marijuana, and smoking pipes, rolled up cash, and official prison papers from Arizona with his name on them. Arriving at the Sanford Medical Center, Chris pulled into the closed ambulance bay and got out, ready to guide her son inside for help. In a matter of seconds, this desperate search for medical help shattered into total disaster. Instead of walking inside, Ian suddenly jumped behind the wheel. Before his mother could react, he slammed the SUV into reverse, smashing straight through the garage door and tearing out into the street amidst flying metal and shattered glass. Stunned hospital workers could only watch as the heavy vehicle sped away into the Bismarck streets, starting a horrific chain reaction that would end 70 miles away in pure, heartbreaking tragedy. Later that evening, county deputies spotted the stolen SUV in the town of Hazen. When deputies tried stopping him, he simply hit the gas, sparking a wild chase down State Highway 200 that pushed police vehicles and human reflexes to the absolute edge. Flying at over 100 miles per hour, the SUV tore through the quiet countryside, driven by a man completely detached from reality. Desperate to stop him, deputies laid down spike strips across the dark highway. The spikes shredded 2 of his tires, but Ian refused to slow down. He kept driving on bare metal rims, sparks flying everywhere as he struggled to control the mangled, heavy vehicle. About 5 miles outside of town, another team prepared to deploy spike strips. Deputy Paul Martin, a 53-year-old veteran with 18 years on the force, parked his patrol car to block the road. He was married, with 3 children and 4 grandchildren. Just a week before, he had talked about his retirement plans with a close colleague he had known since the 1990s. But those dreams would never happen. As Ian sped toward the spikes, he suddenly veered wildly. Whether he lost control or was actively evading, the heavy SUV plowed directly into Martin's cruiser with absolutely devastating force. The violent crash threw Deputy Martin nearly 100 feet into a deep ditch beside the road. The chilling dashcam and bodycam footage of the tragedy would later be played aloud in a quiet courtroom, forcing Martin's grieving widow to cover her eyes as officers desperately fought to save her dying husband on screen. He was rushed to a nearby hospital, but doctors couldn't save him. He was gone. Ian crawled out of the wreckage and refused to obey the first game warden who arrived at the scene. Only after multiple warnings did he surrender, muttering to officers that he had a gun on him. Blood stained his left hand. The heavy smell of alcohol clung to him. During the arrest, he fought back violently, ignoring commands and resisting so hard that the officer had to execute a leg sweep and use intense physical force to bring him down, injuring his hand and shoulder. He was booked into Milan County Jail on $500,000 cash bail. At first, he faced manslaughter, but prosecutors upgraded it to homicide while fleeing an officer, a charge that carries up to 20 years behind bars. He also faced charges for fleeing police, resisting arrest, reckless endangerment, and driving under suspension, plus possessing methamphetamine, possessing cocaine, possessing illegal drug paraphernalia, and possessing marijuana. He first pleaded not guilty in April 2024, but by September, crushed by the mounting evidence against him, Ian changed his plea to guilty on all counts. A court-ordered psychiatric evaluation was finished and sealed. For the sentencing on December 30th, 2024, the Mercer County Courthouse in Stanton overflowed. More than 24 friends, family, and supporters of Deputy Martin filled the room alongside Mercer and Land County deputies in North Dakota Highway Patrol. Behind Ian sat his parents, Senator Kevin Kramer and his wife Chris, sitting with Ian's sisters, witnessing a tragedy years in the making. Chris Kramer gave a tearful statement, her voice cracking as she admitted her son had severely damaged his mind through years of drug abuse. "I really do feel responsible for what happened on December 6th, she said, carrying guilt no parent should endure. Ian offered an apology, insisting he never meant for this to happen, hoping the deputy's family could eventually forgive him. But State District Judge Bobby Weiler was not convinced. "If it wasn't for you being under the influence of substances on that night, we wouldn't be sitting here today," she stated firmly. "You chose to continue going over 100 miles per hour. I don't believe for a minute that you lost control of your vehicle. Most likely, you intended to hit that officer's vehicle." She sentenced Ian to 38 years with 10 suspended, meaning 28 years of prison, plus 3 years of probation and time served. Crucially, without mandatory minimums, Ian will likely serve only a fraction of that time before parole eligibility, giving him an opportunity for a second chance that Deputy Martin and his family will never have. Today, Ian Kramer is locked away, but he stole a vehicle and a future Deputy Paul Martin's retirement, his grandchildren's memories, and a family's peace. While one son of privilege faced justice for choices fueled by addiction and chaos, another man in West Fargo was about to prove that domestic violence knows no bounds of social class, education, or status when pure rage takes over. Case 4, Spencer. In the quiet dark of an August night, 2 5-year-old children watched their father turn into someone completely unrecognizable, a monster, as one would later testify, while their mother fought desperately to survive. What those young twins witnessed in their West Fargo home would become devastating evidence in a trial, showing how anger and alcohol can destroy a family forever. From the outside, Spencer and Sonia Moan seemed to embody success and stability. Both were Watertown, South Dakota natives who spent 7 years building a marriage, raising 3 kids, and maintaining the picture of suburban bliss in West Fargo. Spencer was 32, Sonia just 30. But those closest to Sonia were deeply worried, especially her mother, Kristen Schofield, who watched toxic patterns escalate until she finally took Sonia to see a divorce lawyer 2 years before the tragedy. Drinking had become highly problematic for both, and Schofield believed Spencer had developed a severe addiction. August 9th, 2023 started as a fun day. Spencer played in a golf tournament in Mapleton, then headed out to a local brewery. By the time Sonia and their 5-year-old twins arrived to pick him up, bartenders had already cut him off a dark sign of just how drunk he was. The family visited a friend, then stopped at a gas station, where security cameras captured the couple locked in a heated argument. Their 12-year-old daughter, away at a sleepover, tried calling her mother right around midnight. Spencer answered instead. In the background, she heard heavy breathing, a tiny detail that would later prove absolutely chilling. Back home, their argument quickly escalated into a physical fight. The twins should have been fast asleep. Instead, they watched their father attack their mother with growing fury. One child later recalled seeing Spencer hit Sonia repeatedly, beating her without pause. That child described throwing shoes at their father, desperate attempts by a 5-year-old to stop the horror. "My dad beat my mom up," the child told the court. "My dad was stronger than my mom." The other twin backed up the story, describing Spencer dragging Sonia up the stairs as the assault continued. One child tried to dial 911 around 11 p.m., but the call never went through. Later, the kids saw their mother in the tub. One testified she just lay there, eyes closed like she was dead. Spencer then put the twins to bed, acting like nothing terrible had happened. They went to sleep not knowing if she was alive. 8 hours passed. 8 hours where Sonia lay dying in that tub while Spencer made cold, calculated plans. Prosecutors would later highlight this delay as proof of his cold disregard, showing he valued his own safety over his wife's life. Before dialing 911 at 7:30 on the morning of August 10th, Spencer dropped the twins off at daycare, keeping up appearances as if nothing major had happened. When he finally called for help, Spencer acted as though he had just stumbled upon a tragedy. "It looks like my wife threw up last night. I can't tell if she's breathing," he told dispatchers. Dispatchers tried to guide him through CPR, but it was already far too late. When West Fargo firefighter Matt Bryland and first responders finally arrived, they found Sonia lying in the bathtub, like a body in a coffin. She was pale, lifeless, and her face was bruised beyond all recognition. Her eyes were swollen shut from the trauma. Dried blood stained her mouth, and she had severe head injuries. Defensive wounds on her hands and a broken rib painted a clear picture of prolonged, brutal violence. As first responders worked, they could hear Kristen Schofield screaming in absolute agony. "You killed my baby," she cried repeatedly. Spencer's excuses to the police quickly fell apart. He claimed they were both drunk, got into a mutual fistfight, and she had tripped coming upstairs, landing flat on her face. But investigators noticed a glaring detail. Spencer had 0 defensive wounds. His only marks were arm scratches he blamed on his truck and a set of heavily bruised knuckles. Meanwhile, Sonia's horrific injuries were entirely one-sided. The medical examiner ruled her death a result of blunt force head trauma, but the most damning evidence was a video Spencer recorded on his own phone. The footage captured Sonia's final, gasping breaths as she lay dying in that bathtub. Instead of saving her, he stood there filming her condition. This recording proved he knew exactly how badly he had hurt her. Spencer was arrested and charged with murder, a Class AA felony. He pleaded not guilty in October 2023. His trial began in October 2024. Judge Nicholas Chase made a rare decision to let the twins, now 6 years old, testify remotely over Zoom, as psychologists warned that seeing their father in person would deeply traumatize them again. Defense attorney Richard Verignano objected fiercely, claiming it would sway the jury, but the judge focused on protecting the children. Over 5 days, prosecutors built their case. The children's words proved absolutely devastating. They calmly described the violence, their failed attempts to help, and simply stated that Dad killed Mom. Sonia's 12-year-old daughter testified about the midnight call filled with heavy breathing. Crime scene photos, security footage, body cams, and that awful video from Spencer's phone were all shown to the jury. His defense argued there was insufficient proof for murder, arguing negligent homicide fit better, calling it a tragic accident from a mutual fight rather than a deliberate killing. He beat her up. "I don't deny that," his lawyer conceded, but he didn't kill her. The jury of 10 men and 2 women deliberated for 4 hours before returning on October 23rd with a verdict: guilty of murder. Friends and family embraced in tears as prosecutor Renata Olivesen-Selzer summed up the bitter reality. She noted there were no winners. 3 children lost their mother, and now their father was convicted. On December 30th, 2024, Judge Chase listened to agonizing victim impact statements. Sonia's mother confronted Spencer directly, saying, "You beat the life out of my daughter, and you did it right in front of the kids." Throughout the trial, the judge noted Spencer's refusal to take responsibility, sentencing Spencer Moan to life in prison without parole. Spencer eventually appealed his conviction, claiming his rights were violated when his children were allowed to testify remotely. In October 2025, the North Dakota Supreme Court unanimously rejected his appeal, ruling that protecting traumatized children outweighs absolute confrontation rights. Spencer Moan remains behind bars. His 3 children, now being raised by their grandmother, Kristen Schofield, face the lifelong trauma of witnessing domestic abuse escalate into maternal murder. Case 5, Elijah Page. A simple video game invite between friends spiraled into South Dakota's most depraved modern crime. 3 hours of calculated cruelty in the frozen wilderness ended one young life, eventually claiming another in the state's first execution in 60 years. What started as casual fun on a March evening became a nightmare so brutal that even veteran detectives struggled to grasp the sheer depth of human evil. Chester Allen Pogue never imagined his 19th year would be his last. Born July 4th, 1980 on his family's century-old farm in Norton County, Kansas, Chester learned the value of hard work. Tragedy struck in 1996 when his father took his own life shortly after his parents filed for divorce. The family relocated to Rapid City, South Dakota, before eventually settling down in Spearfish. By March 2000, Chester finished his internship and was only 6 months from graduation when he decided to take a short break, moving to Spearfish to be close to his mother and younger sister. While they vacationed in Florida, Chester stayed behind to house sit, choosing to hang out with boys he wrongly trusted as friends. Elijah Page was 18 years old that March, his short life already heavily scarred by instability and deep-seated violence. Born in Titusville, Florida, in December 1981, he spent his formative years bouncing between foster homes, surviving a childhood of horrific abuse and neglect. Placements in Texas and Kansas City repeatedly failed as Page turned to car theft, burglary, and aggressive behavior. His rage threatened to turn lethal. By late 1999, he moved to South Dakota through church connections. When his girlfriend was sent to boot camp in March 2000, Page also lost his job at McDonald's. Less than 2 weeks later, desperate greed and malice collided. 19-year-old Briley Piper brought his own dark history. 21-year-old Daryl Hodley also carried deep scars from childhood abuse. All three were chronic meth users deeply involved in the local underbelly. Chester Pogue lived outside that dark world, but he knew them enough to invite them over as friends. On the evening of March 12th, the four young men met at Chester's house, supposedly to play video games. Stepping outside for a cigarette, Page, Piper, and Hodley started plotting a dark scheme. High on meth and LSD, they decided to rob the home for quick cash. To pull it off, they knew they had to eliminate the witness. Page pulled out a .22 caliber pistol he had stolen earlier, aiming it at Chester and ordering him onto the floor. Piper kicked Chester into unconsciousness before the group tied him to a chair, placing a heavy tire iron over his feet. When Chester woke up and begged them to let him go, they completely ignored his pleas. Next, they forced him to drink beer laced with crushed pills and hydrochloric acid. They chose not to kill him inside the house because it would leave too much of a mess, according to prosecutor John Fitzgerald. Instead, they shoved the bound teenager into his own Chevrolet Blazer, driving 7 miles to Higgins Gulch, a remote forest in the Black Hills. The horror that unfolded over the next 3 hours shocked even the most experienced detectives. They ordered Chester out into the deep snow, stripping him down to just his undershirt, socks, and shoes in the freezing cold. They marched him downhill toward an icy creek, beating him relentlessly. Down at the freezing water's edge, they tried to bury him in the snow. Chester made one desperate run across the stream before collapsing. A furious Page dragged him back. They forced Chester into the creek, kicking and shoving him under the icy water while he screamed. Then they stabbed him. Page admitted he struck first, saying, "I'll do it," when the others hesitated. According to Page's own confession, they kicked Chester so brutally, they tore both of his ears completely off. When stabbing and drowning did not work, they dropped massive rocks onto his skull, crushing the bone. Desperate for any relief from the freezing cold, Chester begged to get inside his car to turn on the heat. Piper agreed on one condition, that Chester wash the blood off first, but changed his mind halfway through, dragging Chester violently back to the water for another drowning attempt. The autopsy later confirmed death by multiple stab wounds and blunt force head trauma. His suffering lasted for hours. Once they knew Chester was dead, the three left him in the stream, went back to town, and used his ATM card to split his money. Page even kept Chester's jacket. The victim's remains lay hidden until April 22nd, when a landowner stumbled upon them in Higgins Gulch. Once the body was identified, the investigation moved quickly. On April 25th, Daryl Hodley confessed in detail, implicating both Page and Piper. Warrants were issued right away. Police arrested Page in Texas on April 28th. They tracked Piper to Alaska and caught him the very next day. Both gave voluntary confessions. Page even walked through a 48-minute videotaped reenactment at the actual crime scene, guiding detectives step by step through the murder with a cold, casual detachment that Detective Brian Bean said was almost too much to witness. Hoping for a lighter sentence, both Page and Piper pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. During Page's sentencing hearing before Judge Warren Johnson, 19 witnesses testified on his behalf. Given a chance to speak, Page offered an apology to Chester's family, but prosecutor John Fitzgerald presented overwhelming evidence of aggravating factors under South Dakota law. They proved torture of a living victim, murder for money, and the elimination of a key witness. In early 2001, both killers received the death penalty. Hoadley, who claimed temporary insanity, was convicted at trial and sentenced to life behind bars with no parole. They first scheduled Page's execution for August 2006, but Governor Mike Rounds halted the execution due to conflicts between state law and prison rules. Eventually, lawmakers fixed the law, and a new date was set. In 2006, Page wrote to the South Dakota Supreme Court, giving up all his appeals and asking to be executed. Doctors found him mentally fit to make that choice. Page truly believed he deserved to die for what he had done. On July 11, 2007, at the state penitentiary in Sioux Falls, Elijah Page died by lethal injection. It was South Dakota's first execution since 1947, ending 60 years without capital punishment. Witnesses included Governor Mike Rounds and Chester's grieving mother, who held up childhood pictures of her boy. She later told reporters that Elijah Page paid the ultimate penalty for committing the ultimate crime. When asked for any final words before the procedure, Page said nothing. Doctors pronounced him dead at 10:11 p.m. At just 25 years old, Page is still the youngest person executed in modern South Dakota history. Briley Piper remains on South Dakota's death row, making him the only inmate currently awaiting execution in the state. While Daryl Hoadley serves a life sentence, Chester Allen Poage rests in a cemetery, back in his Kansas hometown. Even now, his mother still visits the Higgins Gulch site, where her son's life was brutally taken. Now, let's look at Case 6, Joseph Huck. Highway 34 stretched east toward Interstate 29 on a freezing February afternoon. It was a rural South Dakota highway where deputies often wait, ready to protect their towns from fleeing danger. Sadly, one deputy would never make it home that Friday, becoming a tragic statistic that Sheriff Troy Wellman never wanted to witness again. When desperation meets reckless speeds over 115 miles per hour, split-second decisions between lawmen and suspects determine who lives and who dies. And this time, an innocent man paid the ultimate price. Ken Pro had served his community long before wearing a badge. At 51, the Wentworth local had built a life around dedication, serving as a loving husband to Renee, a father, a grandfather, and a pillar of the community. Friends described him as a man whose word was an absolute guarantee. If Ken said he would take care of something, nobody ever doubted him. He joined the Moody County Sheriff's Office in 2016 as Chief Deputy, bringing maturity and wisdom. Outside of law enforcement, he coached youth sports across several local communities. His sister-in-law, Robin Aish, would later recount a devastating detail. Ken always promised Renee he would make it home after every shift, but February 2nd, 2024, was the day that promise was broken. Joseph Gene Hoke was on a drastically different path. At 40 years old, the Sioux Falls resident was spiraling down a dark path of addiction and rising violence. Those who knew him said his downward spiral was accelerating dangerously. Just a month earlier, a protective order had been filed against him, citing his increasingly physical and violent behavior. Then came February 2nd itself. Just hours before the deadly chase, Hook was arrested in Sioux Falls for property damage. He had slashed the tires of 16 vehicles in what looked like a targeted, rage-filled act of vandalism. Instead of keeping him locked up, the system released him, and Hoke immediately drove to Madison to continue his harassment. Around 4 p.m. that Friday, police received reports of a man making death threats at a Madison business. Once officers identified the suspect as Hoke, they tracked him to a local gas station to intervene. Several patrol cars swarmed the scene with lights flashing. Hoke stopped his black Pontiac Grand Prix for about 10 seconds, then made a fatal choice. Ignoring orders to cut the engine, he slammed on the gas and tore east down Highway 34, starting a high-speed chase through miles of rural roads at speeds of 115 miles per hour. Chief Deputy Ken Prorock, listening to the pursuit on his radio near the interstate, decided to set up spike strips. These tire deflation tools are built to stop runaway cars. He waited on Highway 34 near 472nd Avenue and laid them out. A witness named Tyler Kills 100 from Flandreau was driving along that same highway. He drove past Deputy Prorock right as the chief deputy was setting up the spikes. The cruiser was highly visible with its emergency lights flashing. Moments later, Hoke's Pontiac came barreling toward them. What the driver saw next would be the key piece of evidence. a deliberate swerve. Instead of trying to miss the deputy or steer clear of the spikes, Hoke allegedly drove straight at Ken Prorock in a cold, deliberate act the state called calculated murder. The resulting crash was violent and immediate. Deputy Prorock died right there. There was no hospital trip, no goodbyes, just a sudden, brutal end to a lifetime of service. In that split second, the bystander made an incredibly brave choice. Instead of just calling for help, Tyler Kills 100 reacted. He spun his car around, trying to help the deputy first, but realized it was too late. He then chased after Hoke, who had fled on foot. Kills 100 caught the suspect, tackled him to the ground, and held him down until backup finally arrived. Sheriff Wellman would later extend a public thank you to this brave citizen. He told the witness, "My heartfelt thanks. I know who you are, and I appreciate what you did." Special Agent Jeffrey Collars of the state's Division of Criminal Investigation later interviewed Hoke, who waived his right to remain silent. The suspect's cold detachment was shocking. Collars noted in court documents that when Hoke was told he had killed a deputy sheriff, he replied he did not believe him. Joseph Hoke was officially booked and moved to Madison, where he was held without bond. On February 5th, he made his first court appearance in Flandreau, shuffling in handcuffs past a memorial dedicated to the fallen deputy. Around 20 law enforcement officers watched silently as Judge Bob Pessel read the formal charges. On February 9th, a grand jury indicted Hoke for first-degree murder, a felony carrying a maximum sentence of death or life without parole. Attorney General Marty Jackley took over the prosecution personally. Then, on March 13th, 2024, he announced that the state would seek the death penalty under South Dakota law. Prosecutors cited Hoke's targeting of an officer on duty and committing the murder while fleeing a lawful arrest. Hoke pleaded not guilty, and the case has moved slowly through the state justice system. It is complicated by the death penalty, requiring extra defense lawyers and psychiatric experts. Although mental health evaluations were ordered and completed, Hoke was ruled competent to stand trial. His lawyers requested a venue change, arguing Hoke couldn't get a fair trial in Moody County. Jury questionnaires proved their point. 92% of prospective jurors had already decided he was guilty. In October 2025, the trial shifted to Pennington County, scheduled to begin in September 2026 and expected to last 5 weeks. Deputy Ken Prorock was laid to rest in a small, quiet country cemetery south of Nunda after a service at Dakota State University's field house, attended by about 2,000 people, half of them police officers from across the country. The procession stretched nearly 5 miles. His name is now carved on the National Law Enforcement Memorial Wall in Washington, D.C. Row 13, E Tier 1. A permanent reminder that some protect communities while others destroy them, as Joseph Hoke remains behind bars awaiting trial. Meanwhile, Ken Prorock's family, colleagues, and communities continue to mourn a dedicated public servant whose final act was shielding innocent lives from danger. Case 7. Nicole Rice. Some murders haunt communities not because they're solved, but because they remain mysteries wrapped in suspicion, doubt, and secrets that even courtrooms cannot unravel. This was the case when an 18-year-old student was found dead inside her locked apartment, stabbed twice with the weapon left behind. Detectives initially faced dozens of potential suspects and a baffling crime scene that suggested intimate knowledge and deliberate staging. 15 long years would pass before an arrest finally happened, fueled by a reality television show and alleged drunken confessions. Yet, when the case finally reached trial in 2025, 12 jurors would decide that mountains of circumstantial evidence and suspicious behavior still fell short of proving guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Anita Knutson was born September 22, 1988, in Orange County, California. Adopted at 5 months old by Gordon and Sharon Knutson, she grew up in a large blended family. The Knutsons relocated from Anaheim to Butte, North Dakota, in June 2002 when Anita was in high school. Remarkably gifted, she had published a book while in 8th grade. By 2007, she had completed her freshman year at Minot State University, majoring in elementary education while working at a local hotel. Friends described her as kind and wonderful, excited about summer break and optimistic about life's possibilities. Nicole Rice, then Nicole Thomas, was Anita's roommate in their small 2-bedroom apartment in Minot. Their living arrangement was strained at best, toxic at worst. Co-workers at the call center, where Rice worked as a top-performing sales agent, later testified she complained constantly about Anita, grievances ranging from being locked out of Wi-Fi and microwave access to feeling trapped by their lease agreement. One colleague recalled Rice telling Anita directly, "One way or another, I'm going to get you out of this house." Anita was frightened enough that she had her father install a lock on her bedroom door. The first weekend of June 2007 passed unusually quiet for the Knutson family. Sharon Knutson, who maintained daily contact with her daughter, grew increasingly worried when Anita didn't answer multiple phone calls throughout Saturday and Sunday. When Anita failed to show up for her hotel shift on Saturday, completely out of character, and remained unreachable through the weekend, Gordon Knutson made the hour-long drive to Minot on Monday afternoon, June 4th. Anita's car sat parked outside the locked apartment. When the apartment manager used a spare key to unlock the door, Gordon entered and discovered a nightmare. His daughter lay face down on her bed, covered with a large housecoat, her body cold. She had been dead for more than a day. Police arrived at 5:12 p.m. and documented a perplexing scene. Anita had suffered 2 stab wounds to the chest, one so devastating it severed her heart, causing her to bleed to death. The murder weapon, a small, bloody pocket knife, had been left behind in the sink. Nothing appeared stolen or disturbed. Outside on the ground beneath Anita's bedroom window lay a slash screen, cut from the inside, with Anita's blood found only in the cut itself and nowhere else on the screen. There were no scuff marks, shoe prints, or evidence anyone had actually entered or exited through that window. The front door had been locked. Forensic pathology determined death occurred early Sunday morning, June 3rd. Investigators interviewed more than 40 people in the initial days. Maintenance workers, various persons of interest, college friends. The case generated DNA evidence and fingerprints. Yet no arrests materialized. As months became years, Anita Knutson's murder joined the grim category of cold cases. The tragedy devastated her family. Her younger brother, Daniel, particularly close to Anita, was never the same. Daniel took his own life in 2013, a loss the family directly links to Anita's unsolved murder. 15 years dragged by before the television show Cold Justice arrived in Minot to reopen the cold case. Fresh investigators Carmen Asham and Macaulay Tolbert poured through thousands of pages of files to refocus the search. Then, on March 16th, in 2022, police arrested 34-year-old Nicole Rice at her salon job on the Minot Air Force Base. She was charged with Class A felony murder, facing a potential life sentence without parole. The state's case relied heavily on whispered confessions and highly suspicious behavior. 2 key witnesses claimed Rice drunkenly confessed to killing Anita at different parties back in 2008. Christina Haller claimed Rice admitted to stabbing her roommate after a fight, and William May backed that story. Both insisted they had told the police about these confessions many years earlier, but no record of those tips was ever found in the case files. They focused on Rice's strange reaction when police first called in 2007. Instead of asking about any emergency, Rice allegedly only cared about her pink iPod, claiming it was missing before entering the home. Her boss testified she seemed rushed and cold that day, even brushing off the tragedy by calling Anita a crackhead. But her defense fought back hard. Lead lawyer Philip Sand dismissed the charges as 20 years of pure hearsay. He argued there was zero physical evidence, no DNA tying her to the crime, and highly unreliable witnesses. Both key witnesses admitted to heavy drinking and severe memory gaps. They brought in a former FBI agent who testified that the original probe was botched, slamming police for failing to chase other suspects. Sand argued Rice had a solid alibi, staying at her parents' farm 20 miles away, and was targeted merely because she was the victim's old roommate. Because of intense local publicity in Minot, the trial moved to Grand Forks, starting on March 18, 2025, with Court TV broadcasting nationally. After 7 days of testimonies from more than 20 witnesses, the 12-person jury finally took the case. They spent about 4 hours deliberating Tuesday night, then returned to the courthouse Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. By 10 a.m., they delivered a not guilty verdict. The entire courtroom erupted. Rice collapsed in tears of relief as her family and lawyers celebrated, until the judge forced everyone to calm down. Anita's devastated family slipped out the back exit, and her sister later posted, "A not guilty verdict does not equal innocence. My conscience is clear." Later, one juror admitted to Dateline NBC that the decision was incredibly painful, knowing they would leave one family celebrating while Anita's elderly parents in their 90s still had no closure. The acting police chief released a statement respecting the jury's decision while honoring the town's ongoing grief. Today, Anita Knutson's murder officially remains unsolved. Nicole Rice walked free after 3 grueling years of legal battles, proving once again that suspicion, no matter how heavy, must always meet the strict legal burden of proof. Our next case follows Ray Holmberg. Power insulates. When a man chairs powerful budget committees and signs off on his own travel expenses for 45 straight years, all real oversight dissolves beneath layers of absolute power and fake respectability. Raymond Everett Holmberg built that exact kind of unchecked influence as a top lawmaker. But beneath his mask of dedicated public service, investigators uncovered decades of horrifying predatory behavior spanning across 2 continents, targeting young boys manipulated by his status during frequent overseas trips to illegal brothels. When federal agents finally shattered his carefully built disguise, North Dakotans faced a devastating truth. The giant who had crafted state laws for nearly 50 years had secretly lived as a serial monster, hiding in plain sight. Born on December 10, 1944, Ray Holmberg grew up in Climax, Minnesota. He married Carrie Louise Hackett in Grand Forks on April 27, 1973. While their marriage ultimately ended in a mid-1986 divorce, his political rise appeared flawless, climbing from a high school guidance counselor job straight into the halls of power. In December 1976, Holmberg won his state Senate seat. He would hold it for 45 years, becoming an untouchable political giant. Holmberg's rise to power was calculated. For years, he ran the Senate Appropriations Committee, the powerful group that writes budgets and controls state funding. He also headed the Legislative Management Panel several times. This double authority gave him unmatched control, letting him approve his own travel bills without any oversight. From 2013 to April 2022, taxpayers paid Holmberg about $126,000 for nearly 70 trips, visiting dozens of cities, plus China and Canada, Puerto Rico, and multiple European nations. But taxpayers had no idea some of these trips served far darker purposes. Prosecutors revealed that while serving as a guidance counselor at Grand Forks Central High School during the mid-1990s, Holmberg targeted a student from an abusive home struggling with drug addiction. When the student relocated to Spokane, Washington, and relapsed, he turned to Holmberg for money. Holmberg sent money only if the young man recorded explicit videos, leveraging his power to force compliance through sheer economic desperation. Another witness stepped forward, describing how he met Holmberg as a college student in the 1990s. Holmberg treated this student and others to high-profile hockey games, introducing them to powerful political figures, including the governor. These glamorous experiences had a dark price. The student was forced to sleep with Holmberg as the price for that access. Although the student was 26, making the relationship legal but highly unethical, he testified that he was terrified Holmberg would use his political power to completely destroy him. Between 2011 and 2021, Holmberg traveled to Prague around 14 times, haunting Villa Mansland and similar venues catering to men seeking paid encounters with adolescent boys. He checked into the brothel under the fake name Sean Evans, openly telling witnesses he couldn't be on any registry because he was a North Dakota state legislator. Witnesses claimed Holmberg paid about $60 to buy boys. He also frequented a public park right outside Prague's main railway station, targeting underage victims directly. Under his Sean Evans alias, he messaged friends about his sinister travels, sharing photos and writing dark notes like, "No one is ever too young. Remember Prague." In one email sharing a brothel link with a friend, Holmberg wrote, "The boys rent for $60. He proposed a summer trip to Prague, promising a wild, decadent escape where whatever happened there would stay there. Once back in the United States, Holmberg bragged about his disturbing encounters with boys as young as 12 and 15. When Judge Daniel Havland later pressed him about the messages, Holmberg claimed they were just fantasy. The judge found that explanation absolutely preposterous. Holberg also targeted a 16-year-old Canadian boy online, pretending to be his age to manipulate the teen into sending explicit images. That Canadian teen later took his own life, a tragedy that prosecutors linked directly to Holberg's manipulation. The investigation actually began with Nicholas Morgan D. Rozier, a Grand Forks local who ran Team Lawn and Landscaping. Morgan D. Royer had deep ties to Holberg for years. In September 2020, when detectives searched his property for construction fraud, roommates revealed he kept a thumb drive with photos of boys and had assaulted a child. Investigators uncovered over 6,500 horrific child abuse files. The case grew larger when police learned Morgan Royer and Holberg watched these horrific videos together. In August 2021, Holberg asked Royer to invite his 19 or 20-year-old boyfriend over for a massage. By April 2022, local journalists exposed incriminating text messages exchanged between the two men. Shortly after, Holberg resigned on June 1, 2022, ending 45.5 years of service. Back in November 2021, federal agents raided Holberg's Grand Forks home, seizing all electronic devices. The instant police grabbed his phone, Holberg desperately asked for the state attorney general's number. He left frantic voicemails admitting he was in deep trouble, showing his instinct to use political power. On October 26, 2023, a federal grand jury indicted Holberg on 2 serious charges, specifically traveling to commit prohibited illegal acts and receiving horrific videos of child abuse. Arrested on October 30, 2023, 79-year-old Holberg pleaded not guilty. They sent him home on house arrest with an ankle monitor, strictly forbidden from contacting his victims or being alone with anyone under 18. On August 8, 2024, Holberg changed his plea, admitting he crossed international borders with the sole intent of committing illegal acts. He confessed to repeatedly flying from North Dakota to Prague in the Czech Republic, specifically targeting paid sexual encounters with teens under 18. March 26, 2025. Holberg stood for sentencing at the Burdick Federal Courthouse in Fargo, clad in shackles and a bright orange jail uniform. His defense attorney, Mark F.Z., pleaded for mercy, claiming the state lacked proof of any actual paid encounters with teenagers in Prague. When Judge Havland asked why Holberg sought out victims overseas, the ex-senator claimed it felt legally and politically safe. Standard sentencing guidelines called for just over 3 years behind bars. Judge Havland rejected that, calling the man's actions despicable, sickening, and part of a deeply disturbing pattern of abuse. Referencing Holberg's own text messages, Judge Havland stated, "Those are highly damning confessions. There was indeed contact with children in the Czech Republic." Havland handed down a 10-year federal prison sentence, tripling the official guidelines. On top of that, he faced 10 years of supervised release, lifetime sex offender registration, mandatory therapy sessions, and a strict ban on entering spaces where children congregate. Nicholas Morgan D. Royer was sentenced to 40 years in federal prison, ordered to pay $39,000 to 13 victims. Democratic Party Representative Laura Dronanen remarked, "We will never truly understand how many lives Ray Holberg completely shattered. This is the very man who reigned as one of North Dakota's most influential political figures for decades. This is easily the worst abuse of power and most shocking political scandal in our state's history." 81-year-old Raymond Everett Holberg now sits in a federal cell, his power gone and his reputation forever ruined. Number 9. Briley Piper. 25 years is an agonizingly long time to wait for justice. For Doi Poge, that quarter century marks the agonizing void since her 19-year-old son, Chester, left home to play video games with friends, leading up to the day the state executes the ringleader of their most horrific crime. Briley Wayne Piper waits alone on death row, the sole condemned prisoner in a state that restarted executions in 2007 after 60 years. While one accomplice was executed 18 years ago, and another is serving a life sentence, Piper keeps launching appeals, blaming incompetent legal representation, flatly refusing to take blame for masterminding prolonged torture sessions so horrific that seasoned detectives could barely look at the evidence photos. Born in Alaska on March 20th, 1980, a 3-year-old Briley Piper found a lighter and burned his parents' bedroom to the ground. Born premature, he was walking and talking at 7 months. By kindergarten, extreme behavioral issues got him banned from the school bus. By 7th grade, he was 5 feet 1, weighing 155 pounds, much larger than other kids. Classmates mocked him. Teachers misread his aggression, and he was constantly shoving others and refusing to wait his turn. His mother, Linda, described raising 4 kids alone in Alaska while her husband worked the oil fields for weeks on end. She disciplined them with belts, switches, and a strip of plastic toy racetrack, which she claimed was the most effective. Every one of her biological children suffered from behavioral problems and fell into drug abuse by their early teens. When prosecutor John Fitzgerald accused her of enabling her son's violent path, she softly replied, "Maybe I am the reason." By age 13, his dark trajectory was set by 2 arrests, one for assaulting a woman and another for robbing a classmate at knife point. The state argued that Piper was a master manipulator who easily took control of those around him. Unlike his co-defendants, who endured severe childhood trauma and neglect, Piper came from a stable home. His actions were calculated choices, not the desperate survival instincts of a traumatized child. On March 12, 2000, Piper, Elijah Page, and Daryl Hodley met up with Chester Pogue at his house in Spearfish. The young men played video games while Chester's mother and sister were away on vacation in Florida. After dropping off another friend, the group drove back to the house shared by the 3 roommates. Inside, Page drew a stolen .22 caliber pistol and forced Chester to the floor, while Piper kicked him into unconsciousness. They bound Chester with cord and wedged a tire iron over his feet. What happened next over 3 agonizing hours in Higgins Gulch was pure, methodical torture. The prosecution detailed Piper's lead role, forcing the victim to swallow crushed pills mixed with beer and hydrochloric acid, stripped to his undershirt and socks in deep snow. Chester was beaten relentlessly beside an icy creek. They stabbed him repeatedly and kicked him so hard his ears were torn completely off, before slamming heavy stones onto his skull. As Chester begged to warm up inside the car, Piper pretended to agree if he washed the blood off in the creek, but then dragged him back for more brutal torture. Chester Pogue bled to death from multiple stab wounds and severe head trauma. After leaving Chester in the freezing water, Piper drove them to the victim's home to steal electronics and clothes, later using his bank card and pawning stolen items. Piper fled to Alaska. On April 22, 2000, a landowner found Chester's remains in Higgins Gulch. 3 days later, Daryl Hodley confessed and named his accomplices. Page was arrested in Texas on April 28th. Investigators tracked Piper to Alaska on April 29th, arresting him for first-degree murder. While in custody, he gave South Dakota investigators a detailed confession, which he would later claim was forced out of him. In January 2001, Piper admitted to first-degree felony murder, along with kidnapping, robbery, burglary, and theft. He waived his right to a jury, leaving Judge Warren Johnson to decide his fate. Following a 3-day sentencing hearing starting January 17th in 2001, Judge Johnson handed down the death penalty. Piper was only 20. Later, the state Supreme Court ruled that a jury, not a judge, must decide if Piper deserved death or life in prison. In 2011, a new jury heard the case. Defense lawyers pointed to Piper's troubled childhood, his mother's testimony, and family photos. They pleaded that these mitigating details should spare his life. The prosecution fought back, highlighting Piper's calculated choices, his role as the ringleader, and the crime's sheer cruelty. They pointed to 4 aggravating factors: torture, mutilation of a living victim, killing for money, and silencing a witness. Once again, the jury chose death. For the next 14 years, his defense team filed numerous appeals in both state and federal courts, arguing poor representation, bad jury selection, unreliable witnesses, and violations of his constitutional rights. The state Supreme Court rejected every single claim, upholding his conviction and death sentence time after time. In February 2025, a hearing was held in Sioux Falls before United States District Judge Roberto Lange. 3 lawyers fought for Piper, arguing he had bad counsel and trying to overturn his death sentence. They put forward a new constitutional argument using the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act. Attorney General Marty Jackley personally appeared to fight Piper's petition. Standing on the courthouse steps beside Doi Pogue, Jackley noted, "She has been listening to these arguments for 25 years. This case is about Chester and her." He declared that Piper's appeals were exhausted, closing the state's argument with force. Briley Piper did not even give her son 5 hours to live. On March 24, 2025, Judge Lang rejected his petition, ruling his trial attorneys were competent and due process was fully met. Attorney General Jackley then released a statement. Briley Piper has refused to accept blame or show any remorse for the brutal murder of Chester Pogue 25 years ago. Piper still has the right to appeal to the United States Court of Appeals for the 8th Circuit. As of late 2025, Briley Wayne Piper is the only inmate on South Dakota's death row, while Doi Pogue, now in her 90s, still attends every single hearing, waiting for closure. The contrast is sharp. Elijah Page accepted his fate, waived his appeals, and was executed 18 years ago. Darrell Hoadley got life, but the alleged ringleader, Briley Piper, is still fighting, dragging out the family's pain with endless legal stall tactics. South Dakota hasn't executed anyone since 2019, when Charles Rhines died by lethal injection. Whether Briley Piper will face that same end is still unclear, resting in the hands of appellate courts and time. It is an endless wait for families who only want the jury's verdict to be finally carried out. Number 10. Robert Leroy Anderson proved that serial predators do not always show warning signs. Sometimes evil hides behind an ordinary face. A night shift maintenance worker at a meatpacking plant, blending right into a quiet, low-crime community. Robert Leroy Anderson looked completely, terrifyingly normal. He wore a friendly mask while secretly plotting a precise hunting strategy. He crafted custom tire spikes, paint disguises, and used duct tape to suffocate his victims. Between 1994 and 1996, this self-proclaimed killer hunted women across southeast South Dakota, shattering families and leaving investigators desperate for clues. Robert Leroy Anderson was born on December 4, 1969, at Sioux Valley Hospital in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, the third son of Leland and Ruth Anderson. Little is known about his childhood, and nothing hinted at his dark path. He worked as a maintenance man in Sioux Falls, married Elaine, and seemed perfectly quiet to neighbors. Prosecutor Larry Long would later brand him as pure evil. He compared him to Ted Bundy, citing his chilling ability to play the good guy while keeping a monster locked deep inside. The terror began August 27, 1994, when 29-year-old Lissa Demansky vanished after her night shift at the John Morrill meatpacking plant. She was a Ukrainian immigrant who fled religious persecution with her husband Bill in 1990. Lissa had 2 daughters and was 6 weeks pregnant. She called Bill that night, excited to tell him the dentist had finally removed her braces. He never saw his wife again. Her van sat in the lot, tires deflated, keys still dangling from the door. It was clear predator work. Police first suspected Bill, imagining marriage trouble, and the case soon went cold. But detectives didn't realize that Larissa's repeated flat tires in the months before were actually test runs. Anderson had been watching her, testing home-crafted spikes built to disable cars on the road. On November 10, 1994, Amy Anderson, no relation, ran over custom spike strips on a dark highway. When she stopped to fix the flat, Anderson ambushed her, trying to drag her into the woods. Amy fought back fiercely, escaped, and flagged down a passing car. By the time she identified him in March 1997, he was already facing much darker charges. On July 29, 1996, Anderson struck with shocking daylight audacity. 28-year-old Piper Stry lived with her husband and 2 kids in Kenesa, running a local Bible camp. He had visited earlier under false pretenses, actually leaving his own name and address. It was scouting work disguised as a friendly visit. When he returned, he took Piper at gunpoint right before her children. After Piper missed work, a colleague called. Her 3.5-year-old daughter answered. A mean man carried Mommy away, then hung up. A massive manhunt quickly focused on Anderson. On August 1, 1996, police raided his trailer, finding blood-stained jeans and handcuff keys. They found a pocket knife embedded with fabric and black spray paint. Inside his blue Ford Bronco, they recovered duct tape, a dirty shovel, dog hair from the family pet, and hair matching Piper's DNA. Both children identified Anderson from photos. On August 2nd, Anderson was arrested for kidnapping. Searches along the Big Sioux River soon yielded terrifying evidence. Halves of Piper's shirt, rope, and duct tape with her hair still attached. Chains, eye bolts, and a vibrator. True torture gear. Piper's body was never recovered. On May 8, 1997, a jury convicted Anderson of kidnapping. On July 18th, he was sentenced to life without parole. Just 10 days later, on May 20th, 1997, his childhood friend Glenn Marcus Walker led police to a shallow grave in McCook County. DNA confirmed the remains were Lissa Demansky's. Walker admitted to helping plan the abduction, but claimed he walked away before the murder. Walker helped bury her and got 30 years. He was released on December 24, 2015. The ultimate breakthrough came from a cellmate who reached out in August 1997. Anderson had bragged about both killings, revealing details only the actual murderer could know. He told the cellmate he kidnapped Larissa at knife point with Walker's help, then drove her to a secluded field, assaulted her, and wrapped duct tape around her head until she suffocated. He also detailed Piper's abduction, admitting he handcuffed and assaulted her, then strangled her before tossing her body into the Big Sioux River. Most chilling of all, the cellmate revealed that Anderson hid trophies inside his mother's basement walls. Investigators recovered jewelry. Investigators recovered bones, clothing, and a 9mm handgun. Ballistics matched the weapon to a shell casing in Piper's yard, and bullets from where Lissa's remains lay. In September 1997, prosecutors finally filed murder charges for both women. Court convened in early 1999. Defense attorney David Palmer tried to tear Bruner down, but the mountain of circumstantial evidence, physical proof, and DNA matches easily crushed any reasonable doubt. On April 6, 1999, a jury found Robert Leroy Anderson guilty on 4 counts. He was convicted of kidnapping and murdering Lissa Demansky, alongside assaulting and murdering Piper Stryle. 3 days later, Judge Tim Dallas Tucker sentenced Anderson to die by lethal injection. On March 30, 2003, guards found Anderson hanging inside his disciplinary cell. He had used a bedsheet tied to a bar. He was pronounced dead at a Sioux Falls hospital at age 33. His father, Leland, had ended his own life 3 months prior. Many believe Anderson chose to orchestrate his own end rather than face execution. Bill Demansky met the news with quiet grace. Somehow, I am saddened for his family and for him. Instead of doing good and helping people, Robert Leroy stole daughters, wives, and worst of all, mothers. Ultimately, Anderson left a legacy of ruined families, children forced to watch their mothers vanish, and a shattered sense of safety. The duct tape killer proved that real evil rarely announces itself with a dramatic flair. Sometimes it punches a time card and smiles at coworkers while secretly plotting abductions with the chilling patience of someone who believes he is entirely invincible.